Chop Chop Pyro was, for many years, not only the best video I had ever made, but one that I never thought I'd be able to do better than. It was a simple, cartoony idea with a really good flow and creative gags, and honestly, a lot of luck was involved in making it as good as it was. Despite Chop Chop Pyro being my second video, it was actually the first video idea I ever had. I originally wanted to get into Gary's mod because at the time guys like Saris Khan and Kugawatan were doing really fascinating things with TF2 freaks, and I had my own idea for a freak called Pyrototype who was a Pyro cyborg, and I wanted to make this big series with him. It was going to be multiple seasons with several story arcs that I had planned out and a bunch of minor characters, and it was this grandiose idea, but I knew that if this was the first thing I did in Gary's mod, it would fail because I wouldn't know what I'm doing and it'd be just this big project, and because I would never finish it, I would just quit before I started. So I decided I would start with more traditional Gary's mod animation, being just simple TF2 comedy shorts. I was inspired by this El Toro video called Barbecue, which is about a spy who smells a juicy steak and he wants to eat that steak, but Heavy and this dog and other unfortunate circumstances prevents the spy from accomplishing his little mission. And this basic plot of one character wants something, other characters don't want him to get that something, is something that was used by old cartoons like Looney Tunes or more recently Tom and Jerry. And I'm a big fan of these cartoons, and the basic idea of this character versus character conflict is pretty simple, so that's how Chop Chop Pyro came to be. I didn't actually plan on brainstorming for a video like this. I was trying to sleep and I was just thinking about what I was going to make in Gary's mod. I had this really terrible first video idea that was basically Medic was going to be on 2-4 and then Heavy comes up and says, "Kiss me, doctor," and Medic's like, "No," and then they kiss and it's really weird, and for some reason that was the entire video idea. So I'm really glad I didn't go with that one. But with Chop Chop Pyro, I was trying to sleep, and it was really almost dreamlike that I thought of, oh, this Pyro is chopping wood, he's going at it, and the spy shows up, and the spy says, you know what, I don't want that Pyro to chop wood. And then he becomes the wood and tries all these things to prevent Pyro from accomplishing his mission. And so once I realized, hey, this is a good video idea, I quickly woke up and sloppily wrote down everything that I had thought of just now. And the basic structure of the video was just, Pyro's chopping wood, spy shows up, and then just one after the other, an attempt to chop the wood, it fails, and then try again, so on and so forth. A really linear idea, but in actually making the video, I somehow managed to make it flow really naturally to where it really doesn't seem like it was scripted as, just one separate event after the other. I originally intended the video to only be 2 minutes long, but through embellishing the script, I got it up to around 4 minutes. And so, like Pyrototype, I decided that this video needed to be delayed because I don't want my first video to be a big project where I'm likely to fail. And so that's where Engineer Craves Taco Bell came in. As for Pyrototype, I'm really fond of the idea, but honestly, it's just not happening, ever. It's way too big of a project, and I have much better ideas, and if I ever do get around to making a long extended series, it's going to be an idea I had shortly after Chop Chop Pyro called Space Scouts, but I've been going on long enough, so time to move on. Unfortunately, I can't revisit a lot of my old saves because, as with my Taco Bell video, the bones are all screwed up even with add-ons disabled. Also, that version of the Green Engineer appears to be gone. Not surprising for saves made 5 years ago. This scene with Sniper telling Pyro to chop chop almost didn't work because of an issue with RLOD. I didn't know that you could disable this from happening, so I was stuck with having a sniper that couldn't be face or finger posed. Fortunately, I was able to use gestures to get the point across, but RLOD0 is really a command everyone should have in their auto-exec file. I had a few failed attempts before at making this scene. I couldn't quite get it right at this angle, so I changed it in the final video. I also originally had Pyro calling for Engineer on screen, but later changed it to the Guitar Hero shot since it was more interesting. There's also a few extra frustrated Pyro scenes, such as him sobbing and his head exploding. Last, I planned to have the ground heavy do a Diglett sound since he reminded me of Diglett, but I couldn't find a place to include that. There's a few saves with the red engineer in it, so I guess I wasn't originally planning on the green one being a recurring character. I have no memory of why this red scout was here. This is the hard-to-read script for Pyro Chops Wood, the original title of this video. I later changed it to Lumberjack Pyro before settling for Chop Chop Pyro. One notable difference is that Engineer was going to build a large dispenser robot to crush the plank, only to be sapped. I couldn't figure out how to do this without it taking an absurd amount of time, so I replaced it with Engineer summoning the sandwich. Along with the ground heavy doing the Diglett cry, there is going to be a few other stupid bits in the video, such as Engineer failing at playing Through the Fire and Flames on Guitar Hero, and Heavy stopping his fall in midair to declare that it's keep time. This video involved more lip syncing than anything else, which gave me some early confidence in animating speech. I'll go over this more in a future video, but these are some of the lip sync notes that guided me through animating speech in this video. Focusing on this line, which is Yo! I separated each word into a sound, or phoneme, and wrote how many frames it should last. Then, as I was animating it, I kept a tally to the side to keep track of where I was, since I was doing stop motion at this time instead of SMH or hat. This technique is still helpful with those tools, but for stop motion this additionally helps you know what your next pose should be and is one less thing for you to have to remember as you animate. Speech is more than just lip syncing, however. Your characters should move around as they speak, as it makes the animation much more lively and appealing. You can see me improve on this throughout the video as I began to add more head movements and gestures. Obviously my more recent work demonstrates this a lot better, but for a beginner using stop motion this was a good start. In speech and other scenes, I had some amount of repetition in subsequent actions, but for the most part I gave some variety to the repetition. Like here when Pyro speaks, his arm movement is not the same every time, and same with when the spy plank talks. This did not take much more effort, but the result greatly benefited from the variety. This graph shows how many screenshots I took during each day of Chop Chop Pyro's 2-month production cycle. The gap in the middle is around when finals were, as I was still in college at the time, and the following spike in activity was from increased free time due to summer and an increase in motivation due to the fact that I was close to completion. In total, this took about 70 hours of work for an average of 15 minutes of work per second of animation. For reference, 1 hour per second is approximately my current pace. I had an issue throughout the entire first half of the video with flickering lighting between screenshots. This is unfortunately common, especially for stop motion, but the fix is quite easy. Under Video Settings, disable HDR and Bloom and you'll fix this issue. Although your colors may be less vibrant, but it's worth avoiding flickering. My problem was I made half of Chop Chop Pyro before I learned about this, so I had 2 minutes of screenshots that flickered. I was able to get past it by tweaking the brightness and contrast on most frames, and in a few scenes I had to crop out the moving characters so that only part of the screen would flicker. This took several hours. I used a fair amount of motion blur in this video, along with masking, especially in this clip where Pyro loses the axe handle. My top layer here was a cropped out handle flying for a few frames. This had to be done outside of Gary's mod because the handle and axe head were one single prop. Next, I have a layer without the axe there at all to cover up the portion that used to be occupied by the handle, and lastly there's a layer which has Pyro's movement and the rest of the background. The first person scene where Engie pushes a button to summon a sandwich was really fun to make. There were actually 2 engineers, one for each arm, which made angling them a lot easier. Then I had a camera inside one of their heads, which I moved by driving it, since at the time that was the only way I knew how to move cameras besides fizz gunning. Now I recommend using the multi-parent tool to attach the camera to a prop, which can then be moved with Ragdoll Mover and animated with Stop Motion Helper or Hat. In the scene where Heavy falls, I didn't like the way the shadows naturally looked. They make it look like Heavy is falling from an angle, and they don't really show up until Heavy is close to the ground. So I masked out Heavy's shadow when close to the ground and layered it on top of the actual screenshots of him falling, and I had it get darker over time to show him getting closer. I also feathered the edges of the masking so that the shadow wouldn't have sharp edges. I saved often while making the demo front flip scene to use as checkpoints in case I screwed up since I was doing stop motion. Miraculously, I didn't need to revert to any of these saves, but it's still interesting to look at them. I animated the small spy hand using a really old resizer tool, and it's interesting how it works. It creates a small, or large, copy of a ragdoll that perfectly mimics its parent. It was weird animating away from the scene, but it worked. So that's all of the interesting stuff about the development of Chop Chop Pyro. There's plenty of more things I could have talked about though. Animating is an adventure, and every scene's production has stories. Thank you for watching, and feel free to ask any questions in the comments. I'll be putting notable answers in the description of this video.